Hey YouTube, I've been playtesting Cerydra on the Creator Experience Server, and today I'm very excited to bring you guys some early access footage. If you guys really enjoy using skill damage nukers, well, with Cerydra you can now nuke twice as hard. Literally. Cerydra brings massive attack, crit damage, and res pen buffs to your Hypercarry and does a decent amount of damage herself at just E0S1. In this video, I'll be providing a simple breakdown of what she does and giving you guys an E0S1 showcase with two different Hypercarries so you can see her performance in different scenarios. And a quick apology for my previous showcase with Eidolons. I mentioned I prepared an F2P showcase alongside a premium one, but I failed to recognize my light cone investment was not F2P friendly. Since Cerydra is pretty tailored to front-loaded nukers, my showcases will be E0S1 investment for all 5-star units used. I will also be making a complete guide for Cerydra near release day, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified for when that drops. Since this is going to be done on the CE server, of course that means that things are subject to change for full release, so keep that in mind. First, a look at Cerydra. So, she is very much designed as a cute chess piece, even with this rook design on her cloak. She's wind typing, she's harmony path, and she has massive amounts of attack, decent speed, and some crit damage with virtually no crit rate. So she's looking to be a buff character with direct attack scaling and aiming to be decently fast. For her traces, she's got a decent amount of text, but overall only a couple major things to talk about. So here's a core breakdown of her goods. Skill. So this contains her major buff. It's called either military merit or peerage, and this buff is visible on the combat UI near the buffed character. This grants crit damage, res pen, and attack percent to the buffed character, while also adding a minor amount of coordinated damage based off of Cerydra's attack. There's also a point counter out of 6, which basically tells you how close you are to copying your next move. Yep, we've got ability duplication now. At 6 points, the next skill will be used twice in a row, once normally and once from Cerydra's buff. This will consume those 6 points, so you've got to build it up again. Building these points up is done in the following ways. Cerydra's own skill grants 1 point, ulti grants 2 points, and the buffed ally, using either basic or skill, grants 1 point. So it takes a little bit to get 6 points, but each time you do, the next skill used will be doubled. Set it up properly, and you can make your strongest ability deal damage twice. It's a pretty cool concept in my opinion, and definitely caters towards hypercarries with super strong skill damage. Also, one thing I noticed was that there is no turn cooldown on this skill ability, so I'm pretty sure that the buff remains on the ally until either swapped or Cerydra is slain. But you still will want to reapply it every 3 turns due to her A6 trace, which we'll get to. Her talent basically describes the stuff that I already talked about. Attack buff for the buff character, 1 point when they use basic or skill, and coordinated wind damage on using an attack. For all intents and purposes, this literally is just extra skill description they put into the talent section to divide the text up. Ultimate. This grants 2 charge and does AoE wind damage. For the most part, this ability is strictly for the 2 charge here. Very useful to hold and manipulate her point counter for the right skill copy. Technique. This basically gives you a free skill usage upon entering combat without consuming skill points. The character that will gain the buff is the active character that enters battle, so whether or not they have a passive or active technique, as long as the to-be buffed character enters battle, you're good. And then basic is of course just your boring old basic attack, nothing special besides SP generation. Extra trace nodes do provide some personal damage for her and a little bit of quality of life. A2 converts attack to crit damage. It caps out at 4,000 attack, so get at least 4k attack and your Cerydra will have an extra 360% crit damage. A4 gives her free 100% crit rate because why not? Also, plus 1 point when the buffed character uses their ultimate. And don't worry about overcapping, by the way. She can actually hold up to 8 points, so 2 can overflow. And then A6 gives herself and the buffed unit 20 speed for 3 turns after using skill, which is low-key kind of useful for speed tuning. This is where it's useful to reapply the skill. 20 speed for both herself and the buffed character is pretty useful and is basically permanent uptime as long as you reapply her skill every 3 turns. This allows units like Phainon to build pure damage while also having enough speed to be tuned above a 134 Sunday. Also, grants 5 energy for Cerydra whenever they use a basic or skill, which is scalable also with ERR. And our ulti costs 130, so this is pretty nice for ulti funneling for more points. And then extra trace nodes are providing attack, wind damage, and 2 nodes of HP, giving her more of a damage focus than survivability. Considering that she does get 360 crit damage and 100% crit rate, the nodes make sense besides HP. So overall, her kit is basically press E occasionally on your Hypercarry to prep big damage. When the number hits 6, you will nuke twice and enemies will die. The playstyle is pretty all-in, fitting common hypercarries like Phainon and Archer, and non-hypercarries but still skill spammers like Anaxa, so it works out to their strengths. For leveling priority, her important scalings are on the skill and the talent. Ultimate and basic are just damage multipliers. So prioritize the skill for crit damage and res pen, and then the talent for attack percent and coordinated damage. Those two are the only necessary ones, and then level the ultimate if you want chip damage. Alright, so now let's go over the build that I'm running and close alternatives that you could potentially use. Signature Lycone has insane base attack, also has high attack percent, and also has skill point regeneration on ult and skill damage boost for an ally. Very simple, but very strong for Cerydra. She highly values the base attack to make all attack percent scaling better, which assists in reaching her 4,000 attack threshold. And of course, the 54% skill damage bonus is very potent for Hypercarry that she buffs. The 1 SP recovery is also really juicy quality of life on top of all the buffs, massively improving long-term rotations if you don't insta-nuke content. For the most part, her SIG LC is primarily for the base attack and SP, and allows you to hit 4k plus attack with only 2 relic main stats. Any other LC would drop her to about 3.5k on the same setup, requiring a 3rd attack main stat to barely hit 4k. Now, other Lycones that currently look good for her. We have Forever Victual 4-star, the only other decent attack stacker for her passives. If you run 3 attack main stat, then more options open up. Sunday's Lycone is viable, Dance 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 S5 is viable, and Dreamville Adventure is also viable. Overall though, I find her Lycone choices are pretty limited due to her attack. Run 3 main stat attack if necessary, swapping off her rope. Given our current choices, her SIG LC looks really valuable in comparison. For the relics, we're going best in slot with 4-piece Cerydra, giving up to 36% crit damage to our buffed ally. For planners, we're going 2-piece Lushaka, which is ideal for the energy regen and the attack buff for your first character in your team lineup. 2-piece Broken Keel is also an alternative for the crit damage buff. Main stats are pretty set in stone for her as someone who wants 4k attack and speed. Currently, her build path looks like follows: attack, speed or attack boots, attack orb, and attack or ERR rope. The body piece and the orb are set in stone. While she does have built-in 100% crit rate and 360% crit damage, her damage is much less impactful than what she can provide to allies. There's also no cap on her attack buff, so stacking beyond 4k attack is also pretty good. Boots and rope are a bit more flexible, really depends on how you want to play her. Speed is generally preferred. Attack boots is specifically for 1 rotation kills. Attack is generally more preferred for the rope to guarantee 4k attack threshold, but if you have premium quality relics with good substats, ERR rope is really solid for extended fights to replenish charge points and skill points if you have her SIG LC. Attack rope will be almost necessary if you don't have her SIG LC, since meeting attack requirements will be pretty steep. For the most part, her build is basically attack speed attack with the rope flex. Alright, so with creator server relics, mine's looking pretty solid. You guys saw that I'm running attack speed attack ERR with SIG LC, and she has 153 speed before her A6 boost, so that means she's 173 effective. She has 4.4k attack, 134 crit damage, and 124.4 ERR. Just as an example of her LC effects, if I switch to something like Victual S1, which is the 4-star, I go from 4.4k attack to 3.4k, so I lost about 1,000. Now, if I switch my rope to attack percent, then we're back up to 3.7k, since the original ER piece had about 17% attack substats. So this is a workable sacrifice if you don't plan to grab her SIG LC. Now, a brief glance at her E1 and E2 for front-loaded investment before I run through some demos that I prepared. E1, buffed ally receives 16% to 36% ignore defense, depending on the buffed state. 16% normally, and 36% when the copied attack is ready. Her skill now also grants 2 energy. This is primarily just a damage increase for the ally, but the 2 energy is pretty sneaky to provide Phainon, plus 1 core flame per skill usage. But the 2 energy is pretty sneaky to provide Phainon an extra plus 1 core flame when Cerydra uses her skill on him. 2 energy is otherwise fairly insignificant, but for Phainon it specifically activates his A4 trace. E2, more raw damage here for both the buffed ally and also Cerydra herself. Based on the wording, unsure if this is 1.4x final damage to the buffed ally or just 40% damage bonus. Damage bonus itself is pretty negligible when buffs stack to 300% plus now, so final damage seems more reasonable for an Eidolon, but I'm not sure. For Cerydra, she's either receiving a 160% damage bonus or a 2.6x final damage increase. I wouldn't be surprised either way, since Cerydra's damage herself is not like super impactful, but it is nice chip damage. Let me know in the comments if you specifically know, and I'll get clarification for the complete guide in a week. So overall, the first 2 Eidolons seem decent, but in my opinion are not that impressive. E1 is specifically very nice for Phainon due to that extra energy funnel, and E2 can potentially be very strong if it's final damage bonuses for both characters. Alright, so I've got 3 showcases for you guys today, 2 using Phainon and 1 using Archer. First up, we've got Phainon Sustain and what I would consider his standard best in slot team comp. Phainon Phainon plus Sunday plus Cerydra plus Huohuo. We've got Action Advance, we've got Skill Copy Cerydra, and we've got Energy Funnel Sustain. All units here are E0S1. Sunday is on Cicero's Lushaka, Cerydra is also on Cicero's Lushaka, and Huohuo is on Passerby in Ageless. Double Lushaka and Cicero's is a bit buff redundant, but they are generally best in slot setups for these individual characters, so we're going to keep them like that. Alright, so this team sets up pretty straightforward with Phainon entering the battle. Alright, so Cerydra's technique sets up the buff on Phainon. Then to prepare for Phainon's all-in ult, we instantly prep Sunday and Cerydra's ult without hesitation. Cerydra's charges will line up on a Phainon's first nuke. Alright, so after a Cerydra's ultimate, we do have max SP, so we can use Cerydra's skill to push those charges up and grant 1 core flame. Then we Huohuo's skill for the attack boost into an instant ult since no one is energy capped. This sequence adds 3 core flame to Phainon, 1 from skill and 2 from ult. Alright, so now with proper speed tuning, Phainon and Cerydra's A6 Trace passive is at 141 speed. His base stats are at 121, and A6 Trace provides 20. Sunday is 140 speed, so this is tuned exactly for -1 on the DPS. So we can back-to-back skill usage even if it overcaps us beyond 15 core flame. The reason we do this is to boost Cerydra's charge so we can squeeze in another double nuke later. Without this extra skill, we are going to be 1 charge point off. Alright, so playing it forward, we've got E onto Phainon. Then we got the Sunday boost. With this, we're going to be at 14 out of 15, so using E here is going to overcap by 1 core flame, but we do need to use this for Cerydra's charges. Alright, now we instantly ult, and we have all buffs. Alright, so you notice a couple things here. We are at 7 out of 6 Cerydra charges. That's because any ultimate will also grant 1 charge. Alright, before we nuke, let's do a quick stat check. We are 7.3, 7.4k attack, we are 385.7 crit damage, and we are 250+% damage bonus. And we also see that Cerydra's buff is granting quite a lot of stuff here. We get 1.2k attack, 72% skilled crit damage, all-type breast pin by 10%, and we have additional damage instances from Cerydra. Alright, now we do 2 nukes. First one does 1.1, and the second one, the copied, does also 1.1. Now, both enemies are left at about 5 to 10% HP, so we're going to go ahead and chip them down from this point. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is, since the ads have been spawned, we're going to use W for max Scourge stacks here. This will also action advance the enemy so that we can counter them. Okay, so here's our counter. Alright, so here's something a little bit tricky here. I'm not going to use E here right away because I need to win this duel. So first, I'm going to use my Q Blast attack. This is going to overcap our Scourge stacks by +1, but that is okay long term. Alright, so now that we've won the duel, now we send in our E. Alright, so this will clear the rest of the mobs. That dies to the rest of the DOT. And now we're on to wave 2. So here at wave 2, we are 4 out of 6 Cerydra. We have 3 turns left on our ultimate, and we are 3 out of 4 Scourge stacks. So we need to spend the next 2 turns not using my E at all. We want to get 6 out of 6 first before we use the E, or else we won't have time to even copy it. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and Q Blast on Japard for that chip damage, and then we have a back-to-back turn here. So the second turn, I'm going to do a W here, and the reason I'm going to do this is to action advance and to counter when Japard summons his shield. Alright, so that's Japard's shield. We are going to counter it. We remove it. Now we're 6 out of 6, and then we can now send a free E. So we got 2 E's here because we're just going to copy it. First one is doing 1.15, which is beautiful. Second one also does 1.15, and then we have the final hit. Alright, so as you guys can see from this point, the ad is completely dead. It's just Japard with 21% HP. The rest of the action order goes Cerydra, Huohuo, Phainon, into Sunday. So we have just enough. We have exactly the setup to be able to ult again and basically overkill here. We do have only 2 skill points left, so I'm going to be a little bit conservative, but we do at the very least need to do a Phainon E into a Sunday E back-to-back combo. We have 6 core flame from our excess, so now we need to generate 6 from the remaining abilities that we have. Alright, so we're at 7 here because we got AoE there. So we're just going to pop our ultimate. We get 2 charges from this. It also recovers 1 skill point, at which point we can use the E. We want to get 3 out of 6 here, which is perfect. Now I almost E with Huohuo here, but we actually want to basic attack because we won't have enough skill points if I decide to E here, because we need to use 2 skill points after this. So now we can E with Phainon. We have just enough. Sun is gonna go. Sun is gonna buff. There we go. Now our ult is ready. It's also Phainon's turn. And you'll notice we're at 4 out of 6. An E into a ultimate here gets us +2 Cerydra charge. So obviously this is overkill because he only has 3% HP left, but it's nice to know that at the end of the cycle, I'm still able to get a double nuke off here. And you guys can see my attack rate at 7.5k attack with 270% damage bonus and 385 crit damage. Alright, very nice. That is a Phainon sustain 0 cycle. So now we are doing a sustainless 0 cycle. We are replacing Huohuo with Tribi, and we are literally all in on Phainon's first ultimate. If we don't kill both waves in that time, it'll likely be a wipe. Alright, so very typical setup here. Alright, so Tribi is going to ultimate right away here. We're going to use Cerydra's ult. And then we Cerydra's skill. I could have used Sunday's ult a little bit earlier. I think I was probably not paying attention. Wow, this is totally fine. All right, now we got the stereotypical skill setup. I'll pause here just to show you guys that we are 4 out of 6 on Cerydra's charges at this point. We're also 7 core flame. Now with Phainon's E, Sunday's E, and then Phainon E again, that is +5 core flame. So we're exact on our ultimate. With our 2 E's and our ultimate, we're gonna be at 7 out of 6 on Cerydra, which will guarantee that we'll be able to get a double nuke at the very end again. All right, so we are prepped. Let's go. We've got to kill everything in this one ultimate here. Cerydra is literally 900 HP, so yeah. All right, quick stat check here. 6.4k attack, 448 crit damage, and 206 plus damage bonus. And we also have Tribi's bonuses, so we have a little bit more res pen, and the enemies have vulnerability percent. All right, for a little bit of a cinema slow-mo that you guys first saw in the intro of the video, this is our double massive nuke damage. All right, and as you guys can see, wave 1 literally did not even survive that. So now we're directly onto wave 2, and we have 1 out of 6 turns. We have basically all 6 turns here. The main premise here is we just want to guarantee that we have a double big nuke at the very end. That will guarantee that we win. So for the most part, this phase is just about making sure that we do chip through Japard's shield whenever it's up so we don't get the damage blocked. All right, so Q chip damage on Japard here into a W. This W is always nice for the action advance because it forces Japard's shield and then we counter it away. All right, so with the shield broken, we can send in an E here, and we do a very nice 1.26 mil. 4 out of 6 on Cerydra, 3 turns left. We just need to use these next 2 turns and charge up our Scourge. So I decided to W here since the enemies are going anyway. And this also allows us to counter all of them here. As you guys can see, we have our next 2 turns back to back, so it's very simple. We don't have to W to action advance. I can just Q blast on Japard and then send an E in. All right, so you guys see I have 4 out of 4, but we don't have Cerydra ready. So I need to use this single turn, just do a Q blast, and then we can do a double E here. All right, damage count. Let's see. All right, so 900k and Japard's at 5%. Japard is dead. And the ad is also dead. All right, very nice. Very clean 0 cycle sustainless run. As you guys can see, this was much faster than with sustain, and this is to be expected since we can heavily front load our nuke damage with Cerydra. All right, now onto a final showcase with Archer. Same comp here, just changing out Sunday for Sparkle and still using Huohuo. Keep in mind that this performance is with no quantum weak enemies, and I managed to 1 cycle without too much trouble. As you guys can probably tell, playing around Cerydra is actually pretty natural with Archer since his gameplay is already very prep oriented rather than Unga Bunga. So standard prep here. All right, as we get attacked here, we're gonna Cerydra ult immediately. Then we Cerydra skill for those charge increases, and we have also all those skill points. And then we have Ho E for that attack boost, and also for the ultimate. But we are going to hold Ho ult until after Sparkle uses hers for maximum energy efficiency. So we're gonna boost Archer up and go to town. We're gonna focus the left mob down to avoid its multiple action advances. One Archer skill into Sparkle ult when we have space for 4 SP, and then Ho ult right after to charge everyone's ults up and attack buff everyone. Alright, now that everything's set up, we just go all in with Archer. So on his ultimate here, we're gonna do a quick stat check. He is 6.2k attack, 515 crit damage, and 48% damage bonus. Alright, so ult into double skill into more skill usages. 312k, this is pretty nice. Alright, so after these double skills here, you guys can see that the left mob is left with very little HP. Maybe about like 2%-ish. So we're gonna go ahead and change targets since I can chip that down later with Archer's passive, and also to let it spawn its mobs for free team-wide energy from their AoE attacks. Alright, so I'm going to send all of my skill points here. So then now the ads are spawned. This allows Cerydra to get an early ultimate off. Free energy regen, boom. Alright, so now we're going to be doing basic attacks to use up Archer's passives for SP generation. Alright, so Cerydra's going to basic the left mob. Passive proc, boom. Kohol's going to do the same thing. Alright, so that mob is now dead, which is very nice. So you only have the right mob left. 6 skill points. Archer does have ult ready, and he also does have a Cerydra copy as well. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and send this one in. First E. Now we can copy this one into a second one into an ultimate. Perfect. Alright, so with this, we are going to be able to zero cycle wave 1, but as you guys can see, we will probably not be able to keep this momentum up for wave 2, but at least wave 1 locks in that zero cycle. We only have 1 skill point here, and basically only have Sparkle's ult. So for wave 2, we have lots of buffer for SP, so we can use Sparkle's ult here. We are 1 out of 9. Then we do a pretty standard rotation. Alright, we're gonna get those charges up, and also get Cerydra ready to ult, which is very good. This cycles the charges pretty easily. Alright, also passive procs is very nice. Alright, now we refresh Ho passive into that ult funnel because no one has their ultimate here. Alright, so here's a little bit tricky, right? We are on Sparkle and we have Archer next, but we only have 5 skill points, and Archer is very far away from his ultimate. So this is not a good time to go all in with Archer because we really can't do much, right? Archer in these type of situations, we want to get past that second skill to ramp up the 200% skill damage bonus. So the more skills we can do in succession, the better off we are. So right here, we can basically do nothing because we need 8 skill points from this point to charge up Cerydra. We need 6 to get it to 6 out of 6, and then 8 to use another skill for that double skill. So we decided to use basic attack on both Sparkle and Archer. Alright, so now the ads are spawned. Now we can go aggressive, right? So Cerydra is going to be able to E here. Kohol's going to be able to basic because we refreshed our E last turn. And Sparkle is going to be able to boost. Okay, here we go. Alright, so with this setup, we have all of our skill points. We have 6 out of 6 Cerydra charge. We have Sparkle's ultimate. We also even have Cerydra's extra ultimate if we want to increase the charge again. And then we have Archer's ultimate alongside all the max skills. So we are just going to dump as much as we can into Jeopard and see what we can do. All right, there we go. Into Cerydra's ultimate. This is actually a little bit unoptimal. It would have been better if I used Archer's ultimate to refresh his passive and then Cerydra's ult, but it's in the moment, so just some hindsight stuff. All right, 45% on Jeopard. We have 8 skill points left. And we just keep on sending it, man. Alright, so you notice that the blessing just procced here. And why is that? Because Archer does have a hard cap. We used everything here, and we got off 5 skills in a row from Archer, but we still have 2 SP. So 5 attacks is the hard cap, so we do have to wait for the next rotation. But from here on out, because Japard is just 5% HP, we can chip that down. Archer's focus is going to switch to the elite mob ad. Alright, so Hole is going to ulti here. And then we're just going to go all in here. We're going to basic with Cerydra because we already have the buff refreshed. And we also have Archer's passive. And now it's at 1% HP. Oh, we use the E here. We don't need to, but we use the E here because I want to refresh the passive. But honestly, we didn't need to. Sparkle's going to boost. We do have the ultimate skill points. We also have Cerydra 5 out of 6. So we are ready to go. Alright, so I'm going to ignore Japard here because he's at 1% HP. Alright, so with all these skill usages, Cerydra is now going to be able to ultimate, and that extra ultimate is going to be able to wipe out the mobs. So, we did Archer ultimate into Cerydra ultimate. Japard is now dead to this chip damage. And now we just focus on the elite mob. So, we're just dumping all of our stuff here. I noticed that the Black Tide Fever has 900,000 damage taken. So the first turn it procs here. Boom. It's about 550k, which is very nice. And then Cerydra's gonna basic, and the guy should be dead here. And there it is. Alright. Solid 1 cycle here. In my opinion, I think that was pretty good, considering that there were no quantum weak enemies. So 1 cycle with Archer Sustain, pretty solid. All right, so closing thoughts. What do I think about Cerydra? So in my opinion, she's a really solid support for basically any skill nuker. With the right playstyle, she basically doubles your most important amount of damage, which is quite insane. If you're a Phainon, Archer, or a Noxa main, Cerydra will definitely be a significant boost to your total team's damage just due to her strength and front-loaded damage. She is a Harmony unit, and HSR may release more skill-heavy nukers in the future, and as long as that's the case, Cerydra will continue to ebb and flow within the meta. She's unfortunately not as universal as, say, Tribby, for example, but she is a Harmony unit. So I'm not going to say she's not worth picking up because I regret the advice that I gave when it came to Tribby when she first released. So I'll just say, if you like to see big numbers, Cerydra will give you twice as much of it. In general, I'd say the weakness of Cerydra comps is their consistent damage. If you can't kill or do meaningful enough damage within a short time frame, you have to prep and wait for a whole cycle before you can start up another nuke. But I would say that currently this nuke type damage is a bit meta favored since enemies are so beefy to begin with, and this basically allows you to skip mechanics if you brute force the damage. Overall, I would say Cerydra is a solid Harmony unit and an excellent pickup for the skill spam trio. I'll be dropping a complete guide near her release, so remember to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you think of her. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.